Good evening. This is the last breath, and today I will talk about thinking as a skill in contrast to an automatic system that is, or with other words, consistent, coherent and corresponding. What does this mean? Well, think about other systems that we have constructed, and we have the need for them to be non-paradoxical, following lead, that one proposition leads to another one, that's coherency, and with the added correspondence or corresponding. I put this in a gerund because it's an activity more than these two are more of fixed postures or fixed positions. I do not think this is working. We know it's not working. This is not how thinking works at all. This is the after effect of thinking. This is the presentation of a deed done. Presentation to yourself, could also be a presentation to others. Edward de Bono was very skilled in presenting this. This is the communication of what you have done to others. And this is following a language that we have in common. It is understandable. And when you think about this hard and thoroughly, one starts to understand, of course, that must be maybe a sort of a deviation with the language of communication going one way, because it has its own rules, and of course it's regulated by standards that has to do how we present those things. And that has changed in history, whereas thinking is something new always, because old solutions won't do the trick. And I think somehow this is how I got to understand how it's deviating. So we call this thinking then. This makes sense. And this is why Edward de Bono tried to call this the normal thinking, and this the asymmetrical thinking. This is the thinking that goes from top to bottom or bottom to up, and this is sideways, going away from this way, so to speak, on the side. This could also be the before, in a way that we need to have a look at thoroughly and careful what is at hand. But then in those cases it looks slightly different. It is maybe different items on the list, ways of dividing something as to make it a problem. For instance, we have a leak in the house. We need to divide where the leak is, possible actions to take, the gravity of the leakage and so forth. And that is in a way similar, and it needs to be in some ways consistent and coherent. Corresponding might not be so important. But then you have the thinking what to do with the leak, and then you have to construct something new. Normally. I often think in this case with the caretaker currently at this house. In Sweden we have a system with rental apartments, and you don't have to take care of anything in the house. So it's almost like a hotel, if you think. So the only thing I do is take the phone out and give them a call. But there is not different people coming for different purposes. They have a general person coming, and that's the caretaker. And he also takes care of things that are rather complicated. But the skill is always thinking, because he has to step out of his area of knowledge constantly, because he cannot cover all the different factors as being a carpenter, plumber, electrician, loads of things. Fine carpenter when it comes to the furniture that is already installed. Water and sewage, which is also a different thing. And also gardener and in a way cleaning person that cleans up and organizes things like installations, administrative work. And it often struck me that what he does, he also fixes the windows, which is still another skill. He always uses his thinking, because he doesn't know by hand what he's doing, so he needs to rethink the action. And in a house like this, which is almost 100 years old, some things are up. Well, the doors are actually 100 years old. So how to fix the door handle, for instance, that takes invention, because you can't even find the spare parts. Sometimes the inventions are not very advanced, like this one, because it was impossible to find the locking mechanism for this door. And I think he actually did that in the beginning of his career, about 10 years ago. Now it's very, very different. He wouldn't do this anymore. Probably go into the mechanism and change something that will do for another 10 years or some sort. This is not a pretty solution. He actually wondered, do you want to keep the door? And I said, yes, it is one of the most expensive part of the apartment. It's a lovely door, so-called mirror door. It's made to look like a mirror, as you can see. I didn't really like this, but okay. This goes to show that his manner of solving the problems has become much more skilled. And this is knowledge. This is what happened by time. And the idea that is an automatic system, that is a sort of a tabletop solution that is not really in the world. This is how we hope it is, or something like that. Or we just say, I tried to do this and I made myself correct or right. Well, hello. This system will always make you correct, because it's internally. It's very hard when you're just looking inside yourself to make yourself incorrect. And how to make yourself incorrect in the correct way is another question. That takes external things. Otherwise, you can't know where you're heading or going. And I had this discussion the other day. Somebody said, my planning is always good, but reality lets me down. I had a very hard time thinking that could be the case. But I had the same sort of illusion before. I studied logic. I thought there was systems somewhere out there. Who constructed them? I never pondered about. Maybe it was Bertrand Russell in his sky, preserving logic somehow and sending it out like small showers of logic coming all over the world. It doesn't really make sense to what I was thinking at the time. I think my best guess, I wasn't thinking at all, and that is usually the case. It's a blank. So my conclusion here is thinking is a skill that is either trained or not trained. And this thing coming instead of thinking will actually hamper your training. It's a little bit like saying, I don't have the energy to sit up and meditate. I would do it lying down, while occasionally snoring. I actually heard this once upon a time. This won't work. You need to do like the caretaker at this very building, which I very much appreciate as well, because he's a marvel at finding things. And of course now he's the boss of all the caretakers. Very hard to get hold of him, but he was excellent, and he still is. It's something you learn, but this is something that of course not only plagues individuals, it plagues our whole civilization, because this mistake was established long before we were born, and it has connection as this common perception that we are bystanders to our own reality, and I call that the bystander illusion. Bystander illusion. Illusion, I don't know if it's a correct word, because it's a bit more, it's actually perception. It is something stemming from reality. It cannot be discerned from reality, and it counts as reality until you really go deep into it, and you could then inform it and let knowledge shine on it. And then you can understand it, but you need to do the work. It cannot be accepted only. Bystander is also what gives cause to a world at large, of course, because it is a cooperation or an interactive process with reality. And we need ourselves to project what we will do or think into the future. And this is what I mentioned earlier with Heidegger, his understanding of the hermeneutic circle. And that is that we must have a pre-understanding to understand anything. It has to be a ready-made map model, and that has to come from our whole being, be as complicated as reality itself, but done before. And when we encounter this radical otherness, the two things interact, and then we get this read-off or objectivity. The idea of the antique people was a crude simplification, but it was also a mistake in the order. They thought we enter the world and then we just perceive it, we get it, we digest it or something like that, or we own it. That perception is, for the Greek, a wholly passive process, and that is also clearly shown from the writings of Ian McGilchrist. He goes back to how Greek language developed in antiquity, and there is the turning up of a new order of language, verb and object and subject. This model became more and more common after the Iliad, and of course this is the passive thing that is not controlled anymore by the verb. Before we only had a verb, so to speak, but it wasn't the verb, it was all of this. And looking at the Hopi language yesterday gave me headache, of course. Don't do that, not to recommend. I realized those things are not really verbs. They are activities in some way, and there are directionalities. But to call them verb is to assume this division that we have, so to speak. When I say verb in Swedish or English, we always assume there will be an object or subject going around somewhere. The conjugations with these things, whatever they are up to 100,000 in Hopi language. Beyond belief, to say the least. And it's no wonder that the American used Navajo for a coded script instead of real codes while doing the battle in the Pacific theater. And the Japanese could not translate that, could not decrypt it because it's irregular in a way a proper code wouldn't be. It's very interesting, isn't it? Language could be used as a coded thing. It's beyond belief, but it could only be one of those Indian languages, I can imagine. It wouldn't do for an other unknown language that actually take some sort of normal order. From a perspective of Western viewpoint, normal order. Another problem with this model, with consistency, coherence and correspondence, is that we are the judge. We put the ego as a judge where it's a coherent, consistent and corresponding thing we're thinking out. And that makes the whole thing completely internal, endogenous, because even the objects that are supposed to be corresponding is a making of our own. And we are constantly doing the very same mistake Gödel did over and over again. This is a bit sad in a way, and I would say wholly unnecessary. Once we understand that thinking is a skill and it takes interaction with this radical otherness, we can begin to train ourselves. We can open up our learning to something that we actually keep in the end. And I usually call this a chaotic organized system. This is one way of looking at it. There you have a strange attractor. I will put it like a dollar sign, a good thing. The strange attractor can have different levels, and chaotic organized systems are the only organizations in the universe. There are no others. The rest, this consistency, the triple C we could call it actually. The triple C is in itself unstable. And it doesn't have any resilience and it doesn't progress. It is a piece of blockage. Very similar to the blockage we had in our tubings the other week. The tubing's been filled up with these wet napkins that are very common today. They're sold everywhere and they're very good to clean the behind of a baby and so forth, but they are actually partly made of plastic. So they won't dissolve inside the tubing. And they form these incredible, I saw it actually, that it looks like ropes. And when I saw them being pulled out of the tubing, I thought they were actually handmade because they look so well, resilient and tough, but I realized they are chaotic structures, and that resilience comes from being tucked into the toilet and flushed down. The flushing down causes a whirlwind that goes around like this, and that is a chaotic system. And that chaotic system affects these napkins and put them into an organized manner. The caretaker was mighty surprised, he said, the first time he saw this. It looked like somebody tried to make a rope for some mad reasons, maybe escaping the apartment, being locked into the apartment or something, and then not succeeding and flushing it down the toilet. But this goes to show what chaotic system is capable of organizing at a very low level. At a very high level, our own galaxy, the Milky Way, is organized by chaotic system. That's the only way to keep it together. If consistency, coherence and correspondence would have been the defining limits for the Milky Way, it would have ceased to exist within seconds. It doesn't have any resilience. And another very important factor, it does not progress. It doesn't get better. The CCC system is so unstable, so any sort of incoherence from the outside would disrupt it even more. While the chaotic system is by its making resilient, it is constructed by disturbances. And then it makes sense to understand when it absorbs disturbances, and those disturbances make it stronger. You can see the difference in strength. It is immensely. And we can gain this resilience, Susie Frobel mentioned, and that's been tested to a large scale now. She started out in the early 2000s, and now it is very well tested that those organizational systems for thinking are incredibly resilient, because when they stumble upon problems, disturbances in the external, when you do your planning, you do it in a chaotic, organized way. And when you encounter these problems, they will actually add to the system and make it even better. So that, of course, makes the difference between the two systems even greater. And as I mentioned in a lecture a couple of times ago, if it would have been possible, it would never ever be possible, because it is logically contradictory as well. But if it would have been possible to put mathematics within a CCC system, that would be the destruction of mathematics. It would be no mathematics after that. And that was the dream of all mathematicians. Still is. 95% of the mathematicians think this is the ideal, but that would kill off mathematics. And this goes to show our inner wishes are not always the best. Susie Frobel also adds that when it comes to the external world, our wishes sometimes are wrong, but it's much more frequent when it comes to our internal world that they are wrong. And maybe one of the reasons is that we try to externalize everything in the Western world, thereby making the internal, the indigenous world, even less manageable or functional also. Possibly we can add a fourth C to this equation, and this is conformalism. That fourth C would have been added by Wayne D. Wire, because he shows that our common logic today usually takes the form of the common sense, so to speak, and that makes it so much weaker, even weaker. And we think common sense is out there, and we want this three C's to correspond to that, add a fourth C, and that is conformalism, and once more another limiting factor to the thinking system. And that is also coming from Gadamer, who says his point is political as well. The authoritarian human being cannot make up his own mind. He doesn't have a mind of his own. Just by being authoritarian means you give up your own mind, your own will. Even possibly if you are at the very top. Doesn't matter if you are a field marshal, because it limits you internally. It makes you not think yourself, even though you are the one calling the shots. Actually remind me a lot of things I heard about Napoleon. He complained about those things not being in charge of himself. And since he was a child of enlightenment, it wouldn't surprise me. Actually, I can show something of progress on my own part. Last conference we had in quantum mechanics, we went afterwards to relax. And when I was trying to program my mobile for fixing the parking, I didn't manage. I was interrupted, and I got a ticket, which was very, very annoying. But instead of directly paying it, I did something new. I took a very thorough look at it. I did a deconstruction of it, and I realized that when I finally managed to do my parking, we do it on mobiles in Sweden, everything is on mobiles these days. The time was 16:22. So we had probably come to the bar at 16:10 or something like that. Took me 12 minutes to do the parking, so it fell in 16:22. The observance time was 6 minutes by the guy who's giving the ticket, and the last minute was 16:24. So there was a 2-minute overlap. So he actually gave me a ticket when two of those minutes I got a ticket for was actually paid by me. So I send in this, and this is a good example of logic. Now we are actually entering into the domain of communication. So you need to communicate that from one person to another. And I took a photo of the ticket, the fine, and I took a photo also of I screenshot actually on my parking app. Showed the overlap, and I got the reply. You can. Oh, I couldn't. It's made of plastic. So that was actually a sort of thinking I would have never made half a year ago. No chance, I just would have paid it. And this goes to show that deconstruction, so to speak, careful reading or perceiving of reality can actually pay off even in tickets. That was a bit of a surprise. And I surprised myself in this action. So sure it would never happen before. Although it's made in plastic. I was good with the rains we had in Sweden. This is also a new procedure. I can't even rip it. Well, anyway, I don't have to pay it. That's the best. So, well, you can see here me making the ticket earlier as an object and a denominator or representation in my head. That will actually take out the properties of the real world with all their nuances. And you can You can just imagine there must be a lot more nuances in the world. And this is interesting. Something also coming from Rodolphe Gachet and the chain of the mirror. Once you start realizing there are so many different real takes on the mirror, at least 20, there must be an infinity of takes on the mirror. And then I realized the problem with identity is not that it's wrong, it is rather that it's just one of many takes on reality. And that caused one of those most great liberations of thinking ever. Because now for me identity is a part of the thinking process rather than a limitation. And this will cause limitations that will not help the thinking. It will make it much more enclosed, and it would make it self-confirmatory. And we know about self-confirmatory systems, they are doomed. They are not healthy. They don't take in disturbances. They actually go the other way. They look for consistency, coherence, and correspondence. And of course, that is not chaos. That's the opposite way of chaos. And therefore, we will not have this fantastic thing called resilience. I don't know how to spell it. And this is probably not the way. Resilience, maybe. Resilience has actually been on the theme since chaos theory, also in sort of thinking methods, how to get stronger in your thinking, in your doing. There is an author, I will try to find out his name and return to him, who actually wrote a couple of books with the subtitle, or the title, Resilience. How to get stronger by sort of pushing your limits into things you don't usually do, or our internal, so to speak, I wouldn't call it laziness, but inertness, I think that's maybe. We have an inert tendency not to move things. This is how the cognition system in the basic cognition system is drawn up in Edvard de Bono, and that is actually a claim today that it's completely passive registration system. I talked about that earlier on. It causes specific structures and reality turns up by itself. And he said that's a good model and it will work for simple organisms, but we as human beings, we actually have a greater choice, and that is to break those arranged things where we find it necessary. So our intention or our goal for what we want to do is the little mechanism instead of just taking in pure passivity, which will make the outcome completely arbitrary. Passive system in itself doesn't have a direction. It just do its own thing. And I would say that is also very, very close to how the system, the understanding of thinking in antiquity was. It was thoroughly, it was like they investigated the passive cognitive system, and they found that to be the only reality, and making it institutionalized in a way, making that the construct for the world, whereas it is only one of the working processes of the mind. And that was also the reason why Edward de Bono once entered the public debate in a famous article in The Guardian, and he called it the oppression of the gang of three, or the three gangs oppression, pointing out Aristotle, Plato and Socrates. That article went into massive criticism from the establishment. Of course, he was kicking at the very core of our thinking, but he should have chosen not to mention the names of these chaps, and he would have gotten away with it. They were not a necessary factor. Maybe the tendencies would have been recognized anyway, I don't know, but I would have left the names of these chaps out of the picture. So if you want to compare Edward de Bono to the thinking of Susie Froebel, you can find that the similarity lies in this idea of breaking in Edward de Bono. It's by breaking the pattern and going sideways, what he calls lateral thinking. In Susie Froebel, it's taking in the external. It is endogenous and exogenous, taking in the external, letting both be fractal. And I think there is an interesting similarity here, although the maps that they draw are largely different, but there is an interesting, they both have to in some way to do with something that is radically different. For instance, in the suggestions of Edward de Bono, how to get to this radical otherness is to take a book and just let the pages fly, and you put your finger down and you use the expression that says that. You put it into your consistent, coherent and corresponding system, like a virus or a complete alien, and you try to fix it together again, and thereby enforcing creativity into your life. So that is the exogenous part of Edward de Bono. And another interesting thing, he also points out it's very important to be well organized before and after, but in this exogenous part you need to disrupt everything and then look what comes out, because ideas are chaotic organized systems. They do the trick, just like the very good caretaker here, who always managed to fix the things. And where he gets his ideas, well, you don't know, but they are actually new ideas. They're not replicas of old ideas, although they take the material from the old ideas and then completely reorganize it in a manner you would never be able to get in this linear time order, cause and effect order. He can't put his memory, his past in a new order and fix it. You need to break something there. And this compared to how we normally perceive reality to be absolutely passive. Things are happening by themselves, they get glued together by cause and effect. That is part and parcel of the passivity. And that also diminish our reality in a very effective way. For the worse, I would say, it becomes much more limited and less, incredibly much more repetitive and boring. This is the way out, taken from two honorable persons. Edward de Bono passed away last year, sadly, but Susie Froebel also, who is live and kicking in Germany. I'm grateful for the both of them, and I think this is a good time to round up. The sun has come out, and I wish you all a very pleasant afternoon. Bye bye for now.
Thank you.